Thank you guys for coming. I'm sorry we're a little bit late starting. There are a couple younger kids in the room, just a couple now at this point, and just out of respect for the other people in the room, if there's any noise or those kids become a little bit unsettled, if you could take them out, that would be great. So I am Jody Higgs. I work for Pacific Community Resources Society, and most of you already know that I'm the foster parent or caregiver support counselor for the South Fraser region. Shanda, who I would like to introduce, but she's now babysitting a couple of other kids outside. Shanda Bowie is also now my counterpart, and her and I are going to tag team today to watch those kids so that the caregiver can stay. This is Shanda. Just wave, Shanda.
Hi.
Hello. Come on in. So Pacific Community Resources, just quickly, is a long-standing non-for-profit agency throughout the Lower Mainland, and we work with vulnerable families, individuals, children, and youth in a variety of different programs. And you can go to the PCRS website to learn more about that. So this is our fourth workshop this season with Dr. Vanessa Lapointe, and it's going to be a good one. She's going to be talking about discipline and the importance of discipline, but being able to do that without damage. So thanks, Vanessa, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh.
Already. So you're putting in the chairs. There's someone else coming.
Okay.
So I am a child psychologist, and I work here in the Lower Mainland, and also increasingly abroad with families from all over the world who are facing different challenges with their children and wanting to make sure that they are flowing into those kinds of situations with all of the information on board that they need in order to do right by those kids and give them the best chance. My experience has been, as I work with different families and other kinds of big people, parents and caregivers and foster parents and teachers and other educators, that a lot of times children will have sort of a foundational kind of thing that's making life difficult for them. So they might have some challenges maybe around anxiety, or they might be struggling with learning, or they might have some difficulties with respect to just regulation, where their bodies aren't able to settle themselves back down after they get kind of fired up, or maybe they're really sensitive, or they got other kinds of things going on, and that's their sort of baseline. That's just who they are as human beings. And then the challenge becomes how they are responded to for who they are as human beings. So when you're anxious, when you're sensitive, when you're easily unsettled, when your body doesn't know how to regulate itself, when your brain doesn't know how to regulate itself, all of those kinds of things, it can make life difficult for you. And so as a child, your job then becomes to communicate that to the world around you. You have to let your people know that you're not okay so that your people could then help you. Now the way they're going to let their people know that they're not okay is through behavior. That's how children communicate. That's how adults communicate as well, although we tend to have a little bit more self-awareness and the capacity to build in some language and a little bit of stuff like that. When children who are struggling present with challenging behavior and are responded to in ways that do not foster development, but rather foster containment and shutting down, sometimes involving shame, sometimes involving punishment, then those children who were presenting with this kind of normal baseline, being that they're anxious or whatever, those children then become even more affected. And so it's because of how they're responded to that they end up in my office. It's because of how they're responded to that they often have to turn the volume up and become even louder in the behaviors that they're presenting with. And so the issue is not really what's happening for the child, because that's just our baseline. It's what they came into the world with, it's how they're wired, it's their contract with their own development, it's just what's going to be. The issue becomes how we, the adults, are responding to the children. So when I wrote my book a couple of years ago on discipline, lots of people thought that the book was going to be about how we get our kids to do what we want them to do. And in fact, this book about discipline has very little to do with getting your kids to do what you want them to do, and rather is entirely focused on making sure that you, the adults, are behaving well. So it's about adult behavior and not really about child behavior. Now the good news in all of that is that if you, the adults, are behaving well, then the children in your care, very naturally, as sort of a symptom of your behavior, you will also see that their behavior will settle. It's not going to go away, because that's not what development's all about. Children have to struggle. They have to engage in challenging behaviors. It has to get loud, or development cannot happen. You will never develop the capacity for self-regulation, impulse control, the ability to soothe, all of those kinds of things if it doesn't get messy along the way. So it has to be messy. The goal is not to squash and eradicate all challenging behaviors. That's not the goal. Then you would be erasing childhood. You would be robbing them of the chance to grow and develop. So it's not that we want to erase all of those challenging behaviors, but rather that we want to respond to the challenging behaviors in a way that really supports development, that supports growth, so that we see them maturing through all of that and becoming the grown-ups that they were intended to be. What would it be like to gauge the success of our efforts, not based on the child's behavior, but rather on our own? You see, if you're part of this is that we look to the child to understand, oh, I did that, to understand what the symptoms are. We look to the child to see what their functioning is. Just yesterday, I wrote a letter for the courts documenting a child's functioning so that we could highlight that things aren't going the way that they need to be going for this child, right? And so it's not that we're going to ignore all of the cues that the children give us in terms of how we're managing and how that's all looking, but rather that we are going to ensure that we are behaving well.
Hi, sorry.
How are you doing this, Ranger?
Here, Gary.
Oh, look at.
No, I'm leaving it like that now.
So it's not that we're going to ignore the child's behavior, but rather that we are going to be entirely focused on our behavior, because we know that if we behave well, then the environment for the child will be optimal, which doesn't mean no challenging behavior, but rather the environment will be optimal. You will create fertile ground for development to unfold in the manner that nature intended. So what I want to start with is talking through the three-part mantra of how you're going to view everything that you do with your children, how you're going to view everything that you have to kind of take on with the children that you are growing up. And so the most common question that I am asked as a child psychologist starts like this: what do I do when? What do I do when my kid won't listen? What do I do when my child's misbehaving? What do I do when my kid won't go to school? What do I do when my kid keeps hitting their brother? What do I do when? What do I do when? What do I do when? And the truth is, I don't have an answer for those questions. So you can leave now, if that shakes your confidence. And the reason that I don't have an answer for those questions is because I'm not that child's big person. I don't know anything about that child. I don't know how they slept last night. I don't know what they had for dinner and lunch and breakfast yesterday. I don't know the fight that you had with your spouse 2 nights ago and how that's affecting them this morning while you're trying to get them to school. I don't know what their relationship is like with their classroom teacher. I don't know what their developmental needs are. I don't know where things have gotten challenging along the way. I don't know anything about them. I don't know their temperament. I don't know anything about them. You give me my child, and I'll tell you what I'm going to do in this moment and this moment and this moment. Because my child, I can sniff each of my boys. I try not to, they're teenagers now. But I can sniff them and know them, right? I walk into a room and I have a sense of them. I get when to push and when to hold, right? I know those things because those are my children. I am their big person. I have an understanding of them from the inside out, and I'm able to calibrate and adjust my reactions and responses to them according to my sense of them, which is why I have no idea what to do with any of the children that you are growing up. I also would like to suggest that when you ask the question, what do I do?
It's the wrong question. The right question is, how do I be? How do I be for this child when they struggle? How do I flow into any kind of a challenging dynamic with a child who's having a difficult go of things? How do I be? Because if you can manifest a sense of who you are meant to be in those moments, then what comes out of you as far as what you do, I mean, it could be one of 3,000 things, all of them perfect, because you will be being for the child rather than doing to the child. Do you understand? And so here's the mantra. The first thing that you want to do whenever something's getting kind of challenging is you want to just very quickly take stock of the situation. So you look in, you observe, and you see it. And it'll take you half a second to complete that. 95% of the parenting and child rearing literature on the market is going to stop right there. Because what we see, we don't like. We don't like that they just hit their sibling. We don't like that they're not obeying what we've asked them to do. We don't like that they're not falling into line. We don't like that they're making life difficult. And so we see it, and then we decide, ugh, I don't like that. And it's very inconvenient for me. And so I want to squash it. And you try to then get rid of the behavior. And you do crazy things to try to get rid of the behavior, right? And the problem is that we're stopping at the outside. All you've done is taken stock of what you can see with your eyes. And where the gold in all of this is behind that. When you go inside and begin to feel what it is that the child is feeling, right? When you can go inside what the child is feeling, then you start to get to the good stuff. Because once you've landed on that, all of your neurons are going to light up, have a sense of the child. This is where your intuition kicks in, and you will then be for the child what they need you to be. This is so important that it forms the first layer of 3 different layers of discipline that we're going to be talking about today. This see it, then feel it, then be it sort of guiding mantra. Oh my gosh, this little face just staring out at me. Can you even stand it? Darling. This see it, feel it, be it mantra is going to be this enormous lens that you're going to push everything through. Which means that how you responded to that child yesterday who was doing that behavior might look different this afternoon and tomorrow, because you're going to be seeing them and feeling them and then being it for them based on what's happening in the moment. You have to read them moment by moment, day by day, and know where they're at and know how to respond. Okay? See it, then feel it, then be it. In order to map out for you where we go from here as far as applying all of this to the world of discipline, I want to talk briefly about the idea of connection. So we know that in terms of healthy child development, the most core, most foundational piece is that a child has a healthy, what we call attachment relationship with at least one adult in an enduring kind of way. If that has not happened, and or if there have been significant ruptures in that child's attachment history, I know, without doing an assessment of any kind, that that child is vulnerable to developmental challenges. In studies looking at primates, if you give the animal a choice of receiving love, comfort, and care from their big person, versus receiving food. So you either get food or you get love, but you don't get both, guess what will happen? They'll starve to death. Every time they will choose love over food. So basic is that need. So foundational is our need for connection that we actually choose connection over food. Now imagine that you were to withhold food from a child as a form of controlling their bad behavior. Are there any social workers in the house? You don't have to put your hands up. Right? If you were withholding food as a punishment to bad behavior, you'd have child protection services knocking on your door. Imagine then that the thing they need even more than food, which is connection, that we withhold it from children every day in an effort to control their behavior. It's such a foundational need that the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of the Child includes the right to love as one of its first principles. And so it's not something that can be played around with. We don't mess around with the essentials of life. We don't mess around with what we know children need in order to be okay. Now that attachment relationship in the research world is predictive of a zillion things. It's predictive of how you're going to perform in school. It's predictive of developmental outcomes in every domain: speech and language, motor, social skills, cognition. It's predictive of whether or not you're going to end up in the prison population. 85% of people in the prison population have a dysfunctional attachment history. So it's predictive of obesity, it's predictive of all these things. We find all of these incredible connections between attachment and what happens for kids down the road, because it is foundational to healthy child development. Now, let's consider, with that knowledge in hand, what the roots of behavior are. And I'm going to suggest to you this morning that behavior comes from but two different places. The first of those places is when children experience a disconnection. Then they will engage in behavior, which is meant to serve the purpose of being proximity seeking. And so the very young, like this, how old is this baby? 2 months. 2 months. So when this baby is sensing a disconnection and has a need, the baby will cry. That's a proximity seeking behavior, because what do? Hopefully, when the baby cries, you respond and come close to the baby, right? Now, somewhere around age 2, it changes a little. And rather than being a cry, they're going to engage in other kinds of behaviors to draw you in if they're sensing that you're disconnecting from them, or they just have a need around that, right? Now, when my youngest son, who's now 10, but when he was 5 years old and I was leaving to go on a work trip, I was getting my bags already at the front door, and something hit me in the back of the head. It was a Superman figurine. And I turned around just in time to see Batman was coming my way, and Ben 10 was coming my way, and he had this basket at his feet of all these superhero figures, and he was just unloading them at me. He was so upset and so angry and behaving very badly, right? And so I turned around and I dropped a flag real quick, which I'll tell you about in a second. I said, that needs to stop, not angrily, but in a way that shows I mean some business, right? And I walked towards him with an invitation. I see you and I hear you. And I'm going to figure this out. I'm not saying these things out loud. This is my energy. I'm going to figure this out. I know everything about you. And so I came close to him and I sat down on the step beside him and I said, you're having a hard time. And he looked at me and he's angry still. And he said, you want to come with mommy, don't you? He knew where I was going, and we had been on a family vacation there a few months before, so he was not pleased that I was leaving him for 5 days to go back to the fun place without him. And I'm leaving him for 5 days, and he's 5 years old. That's a big deal. It's a long stretch of time. And so he's upset at the impending disconnection, right? He senses that. It dysregulates him. It fires up his brain. It gets him all unsettled because it's a basic human need. And it's now being threatened. Does that make me a bad mom? No. It's just a natural response to a real life situation, which is going to happen all the time for all your kids. Separation is part of how life plays out every day. It's what they have to learn to adapt to and find their resilience around. But the disconnect can fuel behavior because it unsettles and dysregulates the child. Now that disconnection, as in the case of me leaving to go on a work trip, that was a physical disconnection, but it can also be an emotional disconnection, where they feel like emotionally you've left them. Now if you have young kids, and you were to get busy on your cell phone, or as soon as you pick up the phone to call someone, they need something from you, don't they? Because they're sensing this emotional disconnection from you. And so the disconnect can be emotional or physical, and it will lead to behavior if the child experiences it too intensely. Now the second root of behavior is that they're normal. Did you know that 18-month-old children are supposed to chew on other 18-month-old children? And further, that when you're 4 and somebody has the toy that you want to play with, you are meant to shove the other child over and steal the toy and run off quickly. And when you're 13 and your parent gives you a curfew and you really are displeased about that because it means that you aren't going to get to hang out in the same way that your friends are hanging out, you are meant to give your big person the middle finger salute because you're 13. Why is all of that normal? By definition, the child brain is immature. It cannot hang on to itself in moments of intense emotion. It does not have the neural circuitry to manage all of that yet. And even at 47 years old, you're going to lose your mix sometimes, right? You're not going to be able to hang on to yourself all the time, no matter how mature and developed you are. So never mind when you're 47 or 56 or 72, think about now you're 4, or you're 7, or you're 12, or you're 17. Of course you're going to lose your mix. Of course it's going to get challenging. Of course you're not going to be able to hang on to your good intentions, which are to behave the way the adults are expecting you to behave. You're going to lose all of that. And you're going to get buried in your dysregulation, and then you're going to emote, and all of this stuff is going to come out of you in the form of challenging behavior, and it is supposed to. If it does not, you do not get the chance to grow up. It's only when your brain gets fired up and all dysregulated and undone, and then has the opportunity to be settled, and then fired up again, has the opportunity to be settled, fired up again, has the opportunity to be settled. Only when that happens a million zillion times do the neurons realize that they get to talk to each other that way. And you create then in the brain a neural pathway that controls for self-regulation, the capacity to self-soothe, impulse management, all those things that you want out of your children so that when they grow, they'll be able to manage themselves, right? They get to that when we care for them. They get to that when we respond with compassion and with connection. They won't get there if we haven't responded in those kinds of ways over and over and over and over again. In a petri dish, for one neuron to figure out that it can form a connection with another and stay in connection with that neuron, it needs 3,000 repetitions of being in a neural circuit with that neuron. Now imagine you are growing whole systems, whole loops of neural track in order to gift kids that kind of reality over and over and over and over and over again from the time they arrive until the time they're like about, 27, 28 years old, when we know the human brain has finally reached full maturity. So these things are what we call, and I would say rather inappropriately, misbehavior. It is my view that the word misbehavior is actually a misnomer and probably should be erased from our vocabulary. It's not misbehavior, it's behavior that serves the purpose of communication. Because you're 18 months old and you chew on other children does not make you a bad child. Because you're 13 and you're flipping off your big people does not make you a bad kid. In fact, that we have gone so far as adults that we impose moral code, morality on children's behavior is shocking to me. Who are we to decide, because of normal development, that we arbitrarily say good versus bad? We've applied morality to child development, and it steers us terribly wrong
in terms of being adults who are responding to children and making sure that we are doing right by them. So now, let's talk about what happens when children engage in behavior either because they're normal or because they've experienced a disconnect. So the normal, there's this, I just have a new computer and it likes to not show the text unless I've re-highlighted it. So let's see what's going to happen if I do this. Do you see it now? Okay. So they've engaged in a developmentally typical behavior, which they're supposed to. We've all agreed that that's normal and it's just going to be a part of childhood. Then we, the adults, step in based on how we've been trained and coached along the way, and we respond with what I'm going to call a traditional response to behavior. We stop and see it, rather than go to feel it and be it. We stop and see it, and we say, this is unacceptable. I do not like this behavior. It's very inconvenient. It's making me look bad. It's making me feel bad. I want it to stop. I want it to go away. I'm going to squash it, right? So then we respond with a traditional response to behavior. We use a timeout, we use a consequence, we remove a privilege, or if we're really savvy, we get going with some reward charts and reward systems, right? Now the problem is, all of those things have at the core of them an emotional or physical disconnect from the child. What did we already establish was one of your core basic human needs? Connection. So much so that we choose connection over food. And so in the moment that we engage in the traditional response to behavior, we take away from the child one of their basic human needs, which is connection. How do we suppose they're going to react to that on an emotional level?
More outbursts.
More outbursts, right? The problem is that emotionally, that will alarm them. That will panic them. That will put a bit of fear into them. And that fear, that panic, that alarm gets them emotionally dysregulated, right? So they're going to freak out a little bit. Now there's another way to get directly into being freaked out, which is to experience the disconnection emotionally and or physically, right? Mommy's going on a work trip. Here the disconnection was our response to behavior. So we have a child who's behaved totally normally. They're supposed to. They can't grow up unless they do these things. We respond with disconnection and freak them out. Or something happens in life, physical or emotional, they respond to that disconnection with some fear. Now, they can't hold all of that inside. They're not developed enough to manage that. All of that that they're feeling now, that's sitting inside, all the emotional dysregulation, their job then is to let that come out. They have to act it out so that we can see that they're not okay with it. That they need us. It's like when the baby cries and we draw close. It's going to be a proximity-seeking effort. And so they're going to act out all of this fear in the form of behavior, more outbursts, turning up the volume, letting us know that that's not working. Well, are we going to stand for that? Is this acceptable behavior? Are you really going to let him get away with that? No. So what do? You respond with some more discipline, because a little bit of parenting might help. A little bit of discipline might help, right? So you respond with some more discipline. Then what happens? You freak them out. And then what happens? They have to act out. Well, is that acceptable behavior? No. So what are you going to do? More discipline, right? But what does that do? Freaks them out. Then they have to act out. And then you turn up the volume. And then they turn up the volume. And this is what we call the discipline vortex. You're getting sucked down and down and down and down. and you're wondering why it's feeling so hard. You're wondering why they don't ever listen to you. You're wondering why they're so full of whatever they're full of, right? Why has it become so challenging? And the issue here is not the child, because where did this all begin? Here, this is just life. This is just how it's going to play out. That's just your baseline, right? But then we step in with a bunch of disconnection, and we are the ones, we the adults, we create the discipline vortex. We create the enduring challenge. We create the increasing level of rupture in the relationship that we have with the child because we keep putting it on the line. So I have a solution. Are you ready?
Yes.
It's 2 words. 6 letters. Stop it. That's the workshop. It's great to meet you. I hope that was helpful. Really, if we stop doing this, then all of this goes away and we get to go back to just the normal stuff. Just the regular, everyday, normal stuff that must be part of child development for children to grow up in the way that nature intended. In the way that we know from the science of child development works for them so they get to become the adults that they were intended to be, right? If we can stop that and just allow them to be children. Now the other thing is that you can also work to soften their experiences of disconnection. So you avoid the disconnections that can be avoided. Nobody needs any more disconnect than what life is already going to throw at us. So we don't need to build in extras just to give them practice, okay? We avoid the disconnects that can be avoided, and the ones that cannot, we soften. For example, some of your children will be so sensitive to disconnect that even being asleep overwhelms them. So then they wake up in the morning because now they've had like 10 hours without you, right? Huge disconnect. I once had a client who would wake up every morning and punch his mother in the face. That was why they came into the office. It's a terrible way to wake up every day. Black eyes and all those things. And the reason that the morning was so challenging is because he really couldn't tolerate the separation all night long. And yet you have to sleep. Even if you're co-sleeping and you're asleep, you're still separated from your big person, right? And yet you have to sleep. So how do we soften that? How do we soften the disconnect? How can we build a bridge between good night and good morning so that the river of disconnection underneath it isn't so awfully experienced, right? Well, we can do that by hiding a book under the child's pillow and letting them know that they can come and find us in the morning once they found their hidden story under their pillow, and we're going to snuggle up and read that to them. We're going to talk with them about seeing them in their dreams and all the wonderful things that we're going to do. We're going to leave something of ours that they can sleep with, like a shirt of ours or something that they can smell us on, so that they've got that with them through the night. We're going to talk about the things that we're going to do together in the morning. We're going to come up with all of these ideas to soften the impact of the disconnect. So if you can stop with the traditional responses to behavior, soften the disconnections that must occur and avoid those that can be avoided, you've already gotten 90% of the way towards managing all of this for your kids. And then we're back to baseline. We're back to the things that just have to kind of be as part of healthy child development. And if we can respond to those things in ways that are really just grounded in connection, that are grounded in the science of child development and knowing what's good for kids, then we're rocking it. Then come what may. Does it mean that there won't be any challenging behaviors? They need that. They have to go there. It must be part of how they grow up or they will not grow up. You have to have all of those experiences of firing up and settling down, and firing up and settling down, times a cajillion, to develop a mature adult brain. So it's not, the goal is not that we're erasing the child's behavior, but rather that we are making sure our behavior is aligned with the science of child development so kids get from us what they need in order to grow in the best possible way. Now, I want you to answer this question in your head. What are you actually responding to when you have a child who is misbehaving? Are you responding to the behavior, or are you responding to the something else? If you're responding to the behavior, then you're stopping at seeing it, which is going to lead you down a very different kind of a path in terms of how you're going to address that behavior. You're going to go the route of punishment. You will choose timeouts and consequences and removal of privileges and reward systems and all of those things. If, on the other hand, you're going to choose to respond to the something else, that's going to look very different. You're going to go down a really different path in terms of responding to that behavior and making sure the child gets what they need. Let's spend a moment talking about why these traditional responses to behavior are so problematic. First of all, timeouts. Who can guess why timeouts are the challenge that I'm suggesting they are?
It's a disconnect.
It's a disconnect. In what way?
You're shunning them. You're turning your back on them. Go away. I don't like your behavior.
Yeah, so two things. Who just said physical? Somebody over on this side said physical, right? So there's this physical disconnect, and then we're instructed, usually, if we've been trained in how to do a good timeout, which those two words should never occur in the same sentence ever again. But I was trained, as a doctoral student, I was trained, here's how you do a really good timeout with kids. You separate from them physically, and then as though that's not enough, you shun them, right? You're to ignore them and turn your back on them so that they really get the message. It's not acceptable behavior. Now, that's a timeout. You can call it a thinking bench, you can call it a quiet spot, you can call it any other name. It is a timeout. Are we clear on that? Don't try and make it pretty and make yourselves feel better by calling it something pretty. It took me 6 months. I was working with one boy, and it took me 6 months into the kindergarten school year to realize, because I was like, well, you know, in the timeout thing, like, that's not really going to work. And they were like, oh, we would never do timeouts. And I was like, that's so great. And it took me 6 months to realize they're doing a timeout. They just call it something different. They call it a thinking spot. But it's, you're separated. You're not allowed to come back until you're ready to make good choices so that you can rejoin the group, right? So timeouts have a physical separation and often an emotional separation. Consequences. How do you come up with that zinger of a consequence that's really going to send a message? How do you choose it? You choose what's important to the child. How do you know what's important to the child? They tell you in the context of this trusting relationship that they've developed with you. You know what's important to them because you're their special big person, because you have an intimate emotional connection to them. And you look at them and you're like, I know what's important to you. I know what you love and hold dear. Ha! I'm going to play it against you in order to secure your good behavior, right? Same with removal of privileges. How do you decide which privilege to remove? You remove the one that you know is going to get him where it hurts, right? What do you think is at the heart of the reward system? The star charge or the token economy, those kinds of things. Why are those such a problem? Where's the disconnect in that? Say again?
They have to perform something to receive it.
They have to perform something to receive it. What if they don't perform?
They lose self-esteem.
They don't get it. So the seedy underbelly of the reward system is the not reward system. The star chart is the no star for you chart. Right? It's still a disconnect. It's still a problem because the child is being punished for not having been able to perform. And then you're right, issues with self-esteem and self-concept can flow out of that, of course, because you know what? The road to hell for children was not paved with good intentions. Children are full of good intentions and utterly unable, because of their immature brains, to deliver 100% of the time on those good intentions. But that they have those good intentions, that's golden. And imagine that because they can't deliver on that due to their neural circuitry being about 20-some years away from maturity, that we then punish them? That we create a separation between them and us? You only get to sparkle in my eyes, darling, if you deliver. As for your good intentions, on your way to hell. Right? So the issue is that at the core, all of these have disconnection, and they're all externally based. It's only what you can see that you're responding to. Now, if you're going to do a timeout with a child, do you think that this might lead to some better behavior? You might find initially that it does. Like, you might find that if you send the child away, ignore them, whatever it is, that they're going to often, especially when they're young children, they'll get upset by that. So you'll see them crying, they might seem angry, they might be reacting to it, right? And they might come back into line. They might do what you've asked them to do. They might start to behave and fall into line. Why do you think? What are they desperate to restore? The connection. Of course they're going to stop the behavior. They want you back. Why? You are a basic human need to them. That connection is a basic human need. They choose that over food. It's so important to them. So they will turn the volume down initially on the behavior often because they want to reestablish the connection. So yes, you might get an improvement in behavior, but ask yourselves this question: at what cost? It is the sacrificial play of all sacrificial plays. You put on the line the child's most essential need, and you play it in the name of good behavior. Right? No go. Now, if you talk to somebody who's used timeouts, you will find that they will tell you over time the effectiveness of the timeout seemed to wane. It seemed to kind of lose its potency. You want to know why? You're going to throw up in your mouth a little more. The reason it loses its potency over time is that the child wises up to your game. The child starts to figure out that you are playing their need of you against them. And they can't tolerate the upset in that. They can't tolerate all of the emotion that it stirs up in them. And our brains, the human brain, has this really incredible capacity to protect itself against that which overwhelms. And so you talk to, for example, people who have fought in wars, and then they come back and they can't remember. They'll tell you, I have no idea what happened. I have no memory. They'll have terrible dreams and horrible panic attacks. So we know it's all in there, it's all laid down in the neurons, but they don't have an actual memory that they can reconstruct of it because their brains literally turned off to preserve them emotionally. For children, they can't tolerate the ongoing disconnections. So they have to numb out to them. And even worse, not only do they numb, but they start to what we call defensively detach. And so rather than seeking you, they're detaching you. Rather than wanting to please you and wanting to do your bidding, they do the opposite. In a way to protect themselves, they defensively pull back and detach. And as they defensively pull back and detach, here's what you're going to hear. Fine, put me in timeout. I don't care if you take away my Xbox. So what?
You can't make me. Right? You get that because now you're no longer in right attachment. You're no longer the big person that they are resting into. You've become the big person that's adversary. You've become the big person that's robbing them of one of their most essential human needs. And so discipline, in the way that we sort of generally know discipline, is all about sacrificing a child's basic need. Which is why we need to stop it, right? We are going to talk about what now. I once had a dad come in and see me. He had a 3-year-old child, very larger than life little boy, really cute. And it was lucky he was cute. Because he was challenging. And he was spending up to 2 hours a day in timeouts because he was really challenging. And so we had a similar conversation as to what I've had with you so far this morning. And I let them leave, and I said, I want to see you back in 3 weeks. Because now I'm up first rodeo. I knew if they came back in a week, it wasn't going to be good. And so sure enough, they come back in 3 weeks. And I also know when I send parents out my door like that, there's a good chance I'm getting fired, right? When I say to you, so all the things that you've ever done as a big person, that you've held near and dear to and thought was really working for your kid, it's all wrong and don't do them anymore. Sometimes I get fired. That's right. So 3 weeks, because the first week I knew they were just going to spend it spinning, trying to figure it out. And I invite them. I say 3 weeks, and for those 3 weeks, you've got to stay in it. You've got to keep the faith. You've got to just trust that there is a process here, and we're going to talk about the process when you come back in 3 weeks. I promise you. Right? First week, they spin around. Second week, they start to see. They start to see the effects of what they're doing and how this is changing what's happening for the child. Third week, it really begins to make sense. So the dad comes in the third week, and I was like, so how was that? He's like, well, the first week, I thought you were crazy. I was regretting that we ever came to see you. Second week, I started to see it, and by the third week, I had figured it out. And I was like, yeah, and he's like, and you know, when I left your office that first day, this is his words, I felt like you had castrated me as a father. And I was like, oh dear, so sorry. Because you had taken away from me every single thing that I knew how to do in an effort to try and control my rather out of control child. And he was panicked. So I'm not going to leave you dangling there. I am going to share with you some ideas of how it might feel to be the kind of big person who responds with connection rather than disconnection when you're flowing into a moment with a child. But first, I'm going to share with you what I call the needs barometer. And remember at the very beginning I said there's going to be 3 layers of discipline that we have to take into account every single moment that we are responding to children. The first is this see it, feel it, be it layer. The second is the needs barometer. Now the needs barometer has 3 different stages along it, and you must know where along here a child is sitting as you gauge your response. And so walk alongside is lockdown mode. They are not okay. They are not coping. Life does not feel good. They are not safe. The relationship isn't working. Everything's overwhelming. They are shutting down. It's not okay. That's a child on walk alongside. What's happening for them is the emotional part of their brain, the regulatory core at the base of the brain is in fired up mode all the time. You can't even get your foot in the door. You can't get them to do or be anything because they're not even in a cognitive state where they'd be able to hear you. You can have children who slip into walk alongside for a few moments, for a full day, for a week, for a month, for years, if life has too overwhelmed them. Blending into the second stage would be the low and slow phase. And this is where the child, it's not great, but they're no longer in walk alongside. They're kind of starting to emerge. The brain is starting to settle a little bit. They've got a relationship that they can trust in, that they know they can lean into. These things are all starting to kind of come together for them, and if that can happen,
then you can start to gently nudge them forward in little ways, right? And then third is do and conquer. And this is giddy up and go time. This is your kids who are doing really well. They're in great relationship with you. They know they can lean on you. They know they can count on you. You know that they know that can be trusted. It's all working very well. They're quite resilient. They're quite adaptive. They've got energy to kind of head out into the world and take on school and take on life and all of that. That's do and conquer. How you respond in a moment to a child depends on where they're at. Are you, if you have a child who's in walk alongside mode, like are we really going to spend our time talking about whether or not they're eating broccoli at the dinner table? No. That's for do and conquer. Maybe a little bit in low and slow. But you wouldn't get all up in your business about broccoli with a walk alongside child. The idea with walk alongside is that you're inviting them to lean on you. All of the battles that do not need to be fought, do not fight them. Let them all go. Are you really going to die in the molehill of broccoli for a child who's barely functioning? No, let it go. Are you really going to die in the molehill of you need to brush your hair every morning when they hate brushing their hair for a child who's in walk alongside? No. They don't need to have brushed hair. You can tell everybody that judges you about that I said that. They don't need to have all of those things. They need to trust you. They need to breathe. They need to rest into your care. Only when you have those pieces in place, only when the relationship is really functioning and the brain is settled, will they be able to take on some of the challenges of life, like brushing hair and eating broccoli. That's when we get into low and slow and into do and conquer. Okay? So your responses, see it, feel it, then be it. And the next layer that you must press them through is the needs barometer. Walk alongside, low and slow, do and conquer. Where is that child at? Sniff them. Get a sense of them. Know them. Understand that it can change from morning to afternoon to evening, from Monday to Tuesday to Friday, from September to December and December to March. It's changing all the time. It can change from 9:32 a.m. to 10:04 a.m. Sniff them all the time. Sniff them. Read them. Intuit what they need and adjust your responses accordingly. There is no one size fits all. Okay?
I always say if it's not life-threatening, move on.
If it's not life-threatening, move on. Yeah, especially when you're in walk alongside or low and slow. And I don't know your children. I know that everybody in this room, in some way, shape, or form, is caring for or involved in children that are in foster care. So we know, by definition, that the children you are supporting and growing up have struggled. That you will spend time and walk alongside and low and slow. It's a pretty good chance. Lots of time for some of you. And so that forms the second layer of discipline. Oh, you guys. Which we're going to talk about after your coffee break, because my computer's going to crash for a little bit. We're going to take, because we started a little late, and we actually have to wrap up just a few minutes early today as well. It's now 10:37. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to stretch your legs, to run and pee, to fill up your coffee cups, to grab a Danish, and come sit back down. Okay? Okay. So before the break, we had gone through the needs barometer, and I was sharing with you that this is the second layer that you have to press all of your responding through. So see it, feel it, be it being the first layer, and then walk alongside, low and slow, do and conquer. Where is the child at? Now the third layer of discipline comes down to making sense of the idea that discipline is actually minimally about how you're responding in the moment when things get challenging. Most of discipline actually happens outside of the challenging moment. Most of discipline goes down in all of the other moments of the day. And it really is, because remember, discipline is about our behavior, not about our children's behavior, right? So it really is about, as adults, have we done our job in terms of setting the child's world up so that that world is working for them? Have we stepped in ways that are big and in ways that are passionate, in ways that are compassionate? Have we stepped in fiercely in all of those ways to make sure that the child is living a life in a world that's working for them? Okay? So we're going to now talk about that as the third layer of discipline. It's both about responding in the moment when things are challenging, but don't forget, most of discipline is about prevention. It's about all the other moments of the day and how you flow into those moments in a way that works for the child. So we're going to talk through 9 different stepping stones for responding in the moment, and then 4 different principles around prevention. How you set the child's world up so that it works for them. Those 9 different stepping stones are where we're going to begin, and I'm going to go through them one by one. Now normally, not normally, but oftentimes when I'm doing a full day workshop, this section of 9 stepping stones, we'll spend like 2 or 3 hours on that. So understand that you're getting a bird's eye view today, and that you'll have access to these handouts as needed, right, Jody?
Yeah.
Okay.
Where are the handouts?
Did we email them?
Yeah, you haven't been.
Okay, so
Yes,
we can
you
do
can
that.
email them and-
Yeah, if people would like them. So that you'll have all of the details anyways to come back to. There's also this really great book. Which there are copies of it.
I do have a few copies if people want to sign them out. I don't have them with me today, however.
All right. So, stepping stone number 1, which we're going to start with now, is all about responding with connection. Responding with connection when the child presents with a challenging behavior. In the moment when the behavior is going down, this is a time to focus on the relationship that you have with the child. It is not the time to focus on the behavior. If you focus on the behavior, the child will feel misunderstood and you will create separation. If instead you focus on the relationship, the child will know that you understood, that they did all of that, whatever they did, because they needed you. When they feel understood, they feel connected to. When they feel connected to, the likelihood that they're going to come alongside and do your bidding is much greater. So when the child has engaged in a challenging behavior, whatever it is, do not talk about the behavior. This is not the time. We will get back to that. We will come around to that. Instead, you're going to focus on relationship. Highlight the relationship. Make sure that part is working. And when you've done that, you'll get a chance then. You plant the seed and create a space for you to come back around and debrief later on what happened so that you can sort of talk about values and expectations, but not right now, not in the moment. The other night, we're over at a friend's house, and Maxwell is doing the old elbowing me in the ribs, like repeatedly, because he wants to go home. And he doesn't want to say it out loud. He's got that nailed down because he feels like he might be rude to our friends who have cooked us a lovely meal and have had us over for a lovely evening. But he really wants to go home. And I realize, and so I'm putting him off. I'm saying things to him like, we're not leaving just yet. I'll let you know when it's time. No, not yet. We're going to talk about this later. I'm going to let you know when it's time, right? And he's coming back and coming back. And finally, as his big person, also a child psychologist, I figure out what's going on. He's not okay. Something's happened that's creating this really irritating behavior of him being, you know, to the outside world probably rude and demanding that we leave and go home. And so finally, anyways, it's time to leave and the hour's gotten a little late and so we're going to be on our way. And we get back out to our car, our new car that we had just bought, which was, you know, by all accounts, very exciting. We had to trade in our old car to get the new car. Maxwell's very sensitive. missing the old car and can no longer hang on to himself. I mean, we get outside, as soon as the car door closes, he bursts into tears. And he's sobbing almost the whole ride home about how much he misses the old car. And so if I had gone at him, which I didn't, that one time. But if I had gone at him and be like, why are you so rude? I already told you it's not right now. If I had really let the behavior get to me and gotten all up in my business about what's everybody around us thinking and he's so rude and I should know better and why do I not have my kid under control? If I had gotten all up into my business about all of that, I would have missed the gold in it. Because the gold now is I get to walk them through the futility of having lost the other vehicle and having, to come to terms with the reality of this really great new car, right? But he's not excited about that because he's mourning the loss of the old one. The time then is to focus on relationship. And even then, if I were to get all up in my business, I'd be like, you're so greedy and I can't believe your needs and you blah, 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 and I just bought you this shiny new car and how can you not be grateful for all the things, blah, blah. Right? I could have gotten there. I didn't either. My job is to focus on relationship. I see you, I hear you, and as a result of seeing and hearing you, I'm recalibrating. We're on our way. I understand. And by the way, for those of you, how many of you have heard me talk about Maxwell before and you know about Maxwell's intensity and sensitivity? So we cried 7 or 8 more times over the course of the weekend. We had big, long sobs. Sunday night, going to bed still. Even last night, we talked again. Could we please get the other car? And so it's a big thing for him. It's something that he's coming to terms with in his world and understanding the futility of that. I'm not going to get all on him. I'm going to focus on the relationship. If a child hits another child, you're having a hard time. And that needs to stop. We're going to talk about the flag drop. But we're not going to spend time talking about the behavior. That is not the focus. In the moment, when the wheels have fallen off, the focus is what? Relationship. Have them feel seen and heard. They engaged in that behavior with purpose. For a reason. A really, really valid reason. No matter how inconvenient. And how much you don't like it. It's a really, really valid reason for them to have engaged in the behavior. Have them feel seen and heard. Focus on relationship. Stepping stone number 2. Stay low. They go high. Where do you go? Low. Right? If they go high and then you go higher, where do they go? You ain't seen nothing yet. Right? Way higher. Right? If they're frustrated and your job is to externally, from the outside, regulate their brain, right? Your job is to externally co-regulate, meaning as their big person, through the power of your relationship with them, that emotional connection, you climb into their brain for them and you settle it down. They count on you to do that. They go high. You go low. Young children do not self-regulate. Even 14-year-olds who are all up in their business do not self-regulate. They count on you to do that for them. Also husbands. Husbands do not know this. So they go high. Where do you need to go? Low. Now, when you go low, do not be weird. What I mean by that is, if you got a kid who's like, blah, 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 and it's not working, and blah, 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 and you're saying to them, what I think you're trying to tell me is, they're going to want to punch you. And were I that child, I would want to punch you as well. The reason is that they don't want you, that feels like a disconnect. That feels like a big person who's all like flat and trying to deliver on a trick. Trying to deliver on a strategy. That doesn't feel like a big person who's coming out with their heart and responding to you and seeing you and feeling you, right? And so when they go high, you go low, but be passionate about going low. Be big about going low. Going low doesn't mean getting quiet. Going low means having the opposite emotion. They're fired up. You respond
compassionately and passionately with empathy, right? I know, oh, so frustrating to be a little brother sometimes, I know. So you be passionate about staying low. They go high, you go low. Number 3, drop a flag. So my boys, who are now 10 and almost 14, they don't really go at each other physically so much anymore, but when they were younger, there were certainly some skirmishes, right? And they're not delicate flowers, my boys. They are big, solid German stock, right? If I were to have like stood on the sidelines and been like, boys, remember, kindness and respect in our household, somebody would have died, right? Instead, I needed to step in. I needed to say, that is not working. This will stop. We will not use those words. And I have great relationship with my children. When I come forward and I'm not yelling, it's not from, my energy inside is very clean. I am letting you know that I am in charge of this, and this is how it's going to go. You ask Maxwell even now at age 10, he'd be like, oh, that's my mom's mean in business voice. And so I step in, and immediately after those 5 words, not 5 minutes, after those 5 words, that needs to stop, 4 words, I move on, and I know you're frustrated. I get right back into relationship, right? It's so hard. Little brothers are so frustrating, right? And it may be that I'm driving my shoulder into him to keep him back from his brother while I'm saying those words. True story. And then also turning around and acknowledging the other child. I know, sweetie, it's hard for you too, and I'm coming right back. You hang tight. I've got you, right? So that everybody's getting the connection. Everybody's getting the idea that mom's in charge, and I've got this, right? Does it mean that they're going to instantly stop with trying to pummel the little brother or vice versa? No, it doesn't mean that. Also, I train in martial arts, so just saying. The idea behind the flag drop being quick is that if you go in and start talking, do they feel seen and heard? No. When connection is high and they really are feeling seen and heard, resistance is going to be low. When connection is low, they're not feeling seen and heard. What goes high? Resistance. You want them to fall into line, you keep that high. You go in and talk to them about how many times have you told them, and just yesterday when they hit their brother and you said to them, this cannot happen again, and here we are, not even a day later, and already you go in with the lecture. You're disconnected. Even if you don't get all like I was, but you just go in and say, remember, the rules in the family are that we don't do this, and I blah, 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 blah. You've lost them, because now they're not seen and heard. They engaged in the behavior for a reason. Land there. Relationship. The time for talking about the behavior comes later, outside of the moment. When everybody's calm. We call it the debrief. Stepping stone number 9, and I'm going to tell you about it in a second. Stepping stone number 4. Be firm and be kind. When I talk about responding with connection, responding with compassion, responding with attachment, lots of people get worried that what I'm saying is that I'm advocating for this Disneyland party time parenting approach. Like, release them to the flowery meadows and watch them blossom, hands off, right? Kids rule the roost, there's no rules, there's no regulations, there's no norms, there's no expectations. No! That's really, really not good for kids. They need containment. It's one of the 4 principles of how we set their world up. They need containment. If they do not have containment, they do not feel safe. If they do not feel safe, they'll have an alarm response. And when they're having alarming responses inside, they engage in more behaviors. You must be firm. You must have a spine. You must have rules and norms and regulations and expectations. Children need that to feel safe, and you must also be kind. So your kind actually needs to be bigger than your firm. See, it's a little bit like enjoying the view from the top of the mountain. When you're right up here, that's where firm and kind live together. If you roll down this side of the mountain and you become too big with firm, you're actually just experienced as being mean. Don't trick yourselves into thinking, well, I'm just a strict parent, you're just mean. Okay? On the other hand, if you roll down this side of the mountain, you become a blobby, jellyfish, no spine, big person. Children also do not like this experience. You do not feel safe to them. So you both of you, Mr. and Mrs. Mean and Mr. and Mrs. Jellyfish, you need to climb yourselves back up the mountain because the view up here is really good. You're going to love it. You got to be right at the top, looking out at the world, firm and kind at the same time. No, you may not. I know it's hard when you want a yes and you get a no, right? And that's the sentence starter. No, I know. No, you may not. I know it's hard. Okay? Firm and kind. Number 5. Avoid negotiations and explanations until the no has really been internalized. So often when we give children a no about something, they want to change our answer, they're angry and upset about that. We want them to walk through this little door here and come over onto this side and accept the rule, accept the command, whatever it is, right? And so we say, no, you may not have a cookie before dinner. And we want them to land over there and be like, okay, cool. But it doesn't happen that way, right? We say no, we expect them to land over here, and then they say, but why? And then you say, because, and look what happens. Oops, they run back over. How does that happen? How did they get back over? Hold on. They run through the door, slam it shut, and end up on the other side. That happened because you said that word. Because, or anything like it, right? As soon as you say because, they know that all they have to do is show you that your because isn't a valid because, and you've given them an escape route, right? You wanted them over here, so you said, no, you may not have a cookie before dinner, and they said, but why? And you said, because it will spoil your appetite. You've all said it. We all know, right? And so they run back through, they close the door, and they're like, perfect. No, it won't. Right?
I'll eat all my dinner.
I promise, I will eat my dinner. Please, may I have a cookie before dinner? And then you say no, and they say, but why? And you say, because your little brother will see that you are eating a cookie, and then he will want a cookie, and if he eats a cookie, he's for sure not eating his dinner, so no, you may not have a cookie. Now what is he going to say?
Let him see it.
I promise, I will eat my cookie in the pantry with the light turned off and the door closed, and he'll never know. Please, may I have a cookie? Why has the child not yet accepted your no? Because you still talking. Stop talking. Who said you owe them an explanation? I love this little guy right here. He's like, what's going on? Is this what the big people do in their spare time? They haven't accepted your no because you're still talking. You don't know, children, explanations. There was nowhere in the parenting manual that said this is an egalitarian relationship. It is not. There is hierarchy in a big person-child relationship if it's going the way that nature intended. And that hierarchy does not mean that you get to be unkind. It's power derived from relationship flowing from love and connection and empathy, full stop, right? And when you're a big person, you don't explain yourself. You say things like, we will talk about that later. My answer is no.
And then you can later, when the child has fully accepted your no, you come back around. You're like, hey, yo, so we don't eat cookies before dinner because we got to give our bodies the good stuff before we have the treats. It's just how it goes. When they've accepted your no, which may take 5 seconds, 5 minutes, 5 hours, or 5 days.
But not right in that moment, right? You have to wait for the, and you'll know when they've accepted the no, because you'll get one of these. Okay. And the energy changes from, but why? They're still in it, right? And the energy will change and they get all soft, and then you can say, you know, we don't have cookies before dinner because, but not before. If you do it before, you sell out your alpha. You sell out your position, okay?
You can say because I said so.
Well, you can say because I said so, sure, as long as it's coming from a clean, warm place. And I really love saying, we're going to talk about this later, because it gives them the message, like, I see you want to know. And I'm in charge of this moment right now, so that's not where this conversation's going. It's a no. I know you're frustrated. You really wanted a yes, and you got a no, and you go right back into responding with connection. Number 6, choose your moments. Walk alongside, low and slow, do and conquer. Where is the child at in that moment? How are you adjusting your response to what just played out in front of you based on what you know about that child and what they need? How are you adjusting your response? How are you recalibrating? How are you riffing off of where you know they are in that moment? Are we really talking about broccoli today? Maybe you are. Maybe you got to do and conquer, kid. Lucky you. Right? And if you don't, then don't die on that molehill. You'll get another chance. There'll be another opportunity. But you have to lay down the neural circuitry that's going to allow for those kinds of things to flow without you being in constant battle mode. If you're constantly taking on all of these little things that really aren't important in the grand scheme, and you find yourself constantly in battle mode, you will not be able to grow the connection and the relationship that you need so that the child can be settled and regulated so that they get to be a do and conquer kind of kid, right? So we come back to broccoli and do and conquer. You must first grow the brain. You must first regulate the child. If you're constantly doing battle because you're getting hung up in things that are not important to a walk alongside kind of kid, then you won't get to do and conquer because they'll be so often in a dysregulated state that the brain will not be able to calm. Okay? Number 7, exit gracefully as needed. Know when you need to bail. Right? Because there's going to be moments where you're going to think to yourself, oh my dear Lord, why did I just put that boundary down? Because this is not going to end well. And in those moments, it's not about the child that it's not going to end well. It's because you're not coping, right? You're not doing well. And we all have our moments. Every single one of you is going to have a moment, maybe today, where you're like, no, what was I thinking? Why did I do that? Why did I say broccoli? Why did I decide in this moment to put a boundary down when I know I'm not coping? I know that I'm not regulated. I know that I, inside myself, am not in a restful space, and I'm about to barf that all over this child. If you barf that all over the child that you're caring for, you will have to then spend time repairing it in damage mode, working your way back from that, right? The far lesser of all the evils is to exit gracefully. Oh my God, it's 5:05. I was supposed to call Grandma right at 5 o'clock. I'm gonna have to go and make that call, and you walk away from that plate of cookies. And if they snag one or two, so be it, right? The idea is to exit gracefully rather than have a fall from grace. The fall from grace sounds like this. Fine! Eat the cookie. See if I care if you don't eat the meal that I prepared from scratch for the last, whatever, right? That's the fall from grace. That is not a graceful exit. You don't want the fall from grace because then you got to clean the mess up afterwards. And especially when the child might already be struggling, you do not want the fall from grace. Now, if you're finding that you have to exit gracefully all day, every day, we should talk about that. Because that means there's something going on for you that you haven't been able to sort out. That's going on for you. And then we need to address that. How do we settle you? How do we regulate you? How do we make sure that your needs are getting met so that you can then be the kind of big person who's available for a child on an emotional plane to meet their needs, right? And so don't worry about it. If every now and then you gotta bail because you're like, oh, not ending well, that's great. Guess what? You're gonna get another chance, probably within the hour, to put a line down and hold it, right? Don't worry. If you are finding that you're going there very frequently, then maybe start to look inside and check in with self to see what's going on for me that I'm not now able to hold on to myself with any kind of dependability. Stepping stone number 8, hold relationship as the bottom line. So even if you get home today and tonight or tomorrow sometime something challenging presents and you're like, I don't remember, I don't know what to do. What did she say again? What were the 9 stepping stones? Which, by the way, you're never going to be in a moment where you're like, stepping stone number 1. Blah, 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 blah. That would, like, you'd make yourselves crazy trying to think about that in the moment. The idea behind the stepping stones is just to give you a flavor of what being this looks and feels like. Not that you're going to go through and jump around to all 9 stepping stones. Oh my gosh, you'll lose your minds. And your children will be like, right? So, if you don't know, and you're like, what are we supposed to do, da 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 da, remember it's not about doing, it's about being. And be nothing that gets in the way of the relationship. Preserve the relationship. Preserve the connection at all costs. Do nothing, say nothing, be nothing that you wouldn't want somebody to do, say, or be to you. You don't want your spouse to grump at you when you come home from work all grumpy, then don't grump at that child who's grumping at you. Right? Respond to them with relationship. I see you. I hear you. I feel you. Whatever way you can get that message through to them, you're doing brilliantly. Relationship is the bottom line. In the moment, do nothing, say nothing, be nothing that interrupts the relationship that you are building and have with that child. And then stepping stone number 9 is the debrief. This is what happens by definition at the end. When the child is calm and when you are calm. First, you must connect. We never do the debrief in the moment. The brain can't hear it, the soul can't receive it, the lesson gets lost. Never during the moment is it time for the lesson, for the debrief, for the reviewing of the family's value systems, for the reviewing of the expectations. We don't do that in the moment ever, 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 ever. In the history of time, in all of the future of time, we will never, ever deal with the issue in the moment that it's occurring. We come back to it afterwards when everybody is calm. It may take 5 days to get to that space and to be granted the opportunity to do that. You wait. It is much, much better to walk softly and come at it through connection when the moment presents. And then you must connect first, right? Connection is high, resistance is low. So the relationship has to be well established, high connection, but also in the moment when you're going to circle back around for the debrief, connect first so that they can then hear you and really receive it and feel safe in the receiving of that. Oh, you're reading the so-and-so book and I can see you're on chapter 5. I remember chapter 5. I loved that chapter. I'm not going to tell you what happens because, you know, spoiler alert. But I love it. Tell me what you think about it when you get to the end of chapter 5, okay? So good. By the way, we need to talk about what happened yesterday with your brother. It's only going to take a minute. In our family, we do not use our hands to solve our problems. Can I count on you next time to use your words or come and find me if you need help? That's it. And then if they want to have a discussion or they have questions, then of course, this is the time, right? And the reason you say, can I count on you, is that you want to honor the child for the good intention. Does that mean that they're never going to hit their brother again? Hells no.
It's so funny.
Yeah.
It's so funny because, well, I have a lot of little kids. And I'm cooking sometimes in the kitchen and they run in the kitchen, somebody hits somebody, I'm crying. And I sometimes just put a little water on. Or I say, okay, just have some water. And I says, he did what? He hit you? You know, he's not really supposed to do that. And the child just run back. And I never understand why it worked, you know? Like, I didn't actually go to the other child and go in and try to solve it. I just said what I said, and the child just run back to the room. And I noticed that most of them are like that. They come and they complain, and if they hear something appropriate, I guess, and then they just run back.
I think if they feel seen and heard, if they trust that you're in charge, then they'll be settled by that.
Yeah, I didn't understand before why it worked, because I didn't really do anything. I didn't go
Right.
in the room and talk to the other child.
Right.
I just said what I said, and they're gone.
You got some swagger. It's all about swagger, right? And it really is. It's about being big. We're going to talk about that as one of the 4 principles. When you be big and you got your swagger about you, it often doesn't even matter what's falling out of your mouth. What matters it's your tone of voice. It's your how you walk and talk. It's like your presence. And then they're like, oh, okay, perfect. It works. She's in charge. I love that. And so we want to plant the seed of ability. We want to honor them for their good intention. We know that that will not mean that they will not hit again, but rather that we see, oh, so you hit again. Of course, that's part of being a human. It's part of being a person. You're not going to be able to hang on to it all the time. And I see your good intention. I honor you for the good intention, even though I know you aren't going to be able to deliver on it. So those are the 9 stepping stones. And then remember, outside of the moment of responding to the challenging behavior, we also have the 4 principles of how we set the child's world up. And I'm going to walk you through those briefly now, and then we'll stop. I'll have a moment for a question or 2 if you have, and then we'll wrap up for the boarding. So the first of the big principles is, in their everyday world, in how you eat, sleep, and breathe alongside them, in how you create hellos and goodbyes, in how you manage good nights, in how you deal with cleanup time, in how every single moment of every single day, the way you breathe needs to be infused with connection. How do you structure life? How do you create a world for a child so that they believe that's the bottom line? That they know this is the way that you sort of roll around that and flow into that? Do you find time to play with them and connect? Do you find ways to be generous with them and connect? Do you make sure that you have time for the little look and the tussle of the hair and all of the little drip, drop, drip, drop, drip, drop, drip, drop moments where you can just fill them with connection? Give them that sense of you. Give them that flavor of you. Principle number 2, be big. You have got to be in charge. If you are not in charge, then the child will put themselves in charge because they can't tolerate the idea of somebody not being in the lead. It is not the natural state of things. Somebody needs to be in charge. They will put themselves in charge if they sense that you are not. And you cannot grow up a child who is in charge of you. It's impossible. So you need to be here. How do you get there? Not through force. The way you find yourselves in the in-charge position, your power to grow up these children flows from the relationship that you have with them and no other place. You have context to parent when you have relationship. If you do not have relationship working for you, you have no power, no context. You have but a rule. Just because you have the role of parent, foster parent, teacher, educator, other big person, just because you have the role does not mean you have the relationship. You have to build the relationship. And once you've built the relationship, then you have power. Then you have context. In order to be that kind of person, you've got to be big. When you respond to your kids and you use that voice and you are that big person, they're like, oh, okay, got it, right? When you can flow in, when I walked in here this morning and stood up in front of you to begin talking, I wasn't like voice cracking, no eye contact, bending down, reading my slides. If I was that way, how do you think the morning would have gone? Probably not well. You'd have been like, wow, who hired her? Even if I had to do an interpretive dance, I would never do a presentation where I like curled up and read my slides. You wouldn't hear any of it because I wouldn't be big enough. And as it is, I don't know if you've noticed, but as I've been talking, some of you are kind of far away, so you may not have felt it. Every single pair of eyes in this room, I have landed on more than once. On purpose. Not because I'm playing you. It's just a natural way of flowing into a moment when you're working to connect with people. Connection's high, resistance is low. I want you to hear my message. I'm working on connecting with you, and I'm being big in that. I got my swagger all around me so that I can come into the moment and be what I need to be for you here. But also, when we're in moments with our children and we're wanting to be big, it's about that essence. It's the essence of bigness. And I can't teach that to you. You walk into it, right? Number 3, create containment. They need structure. They need rules. They need boundaries. They need containment. They need to know that if they're driving across the Patella Bridge, as I was this morning, and they bump into the guardrails, that the guardrails will hold them. I didn't bump into the guardrails. That is like the most terrifying bridge in all the land ever, right? And they need to know that those guardrails are going to hold strong. So they need you to have rules, expectations, and standards. They need that. And when they get that, they feel safe and contained. It's just that they need you to hold all of that without being mean. And they need you to hold all of that with flexibility and understanding, knowing that there's a gray zone for broccoli, depending on where the child's coming from and where they're at. And principle number 4 is all about connecting to relax. You are growing up children during a time when there's a veritable epidemic of anxiety. There's about 200,000 children in the province of BC as we sit here this morning who are struggling with clinically significant symptoms of anxiety. 75% of those children will never ever be helped either through group or direct support. So it comes down to you. You get to be the primary interventionist for those kids. So you gotta know it, and you gotta walk it, and you gotta talk it. Teaching kids tools for how to go into their bodies and take some deep breaths and visit their thoughts and understand how that all works together, that you do that with them in the context of the relationship. Because in that relationship you have power. If you teach them belly breaths, where you take your air in through the nose and you're going to push it out through your mouth and your belly's going to get big and fat when you blow it in, breathe it in, and then when you blow it out, and your belly goes back down. And they get to watch your belly extend, and they love it when they're little. You get really fat, and then it goes away. You teach them to blow out their birthday candles. And so you get them doing some deep breaths. When they're older, you really teach them what circular breathing is. You go through meditation. in whatever way works for you and fits with your family value system. My boy, we've done bedtime meditations at our house for years. You, progressive muscle relaxation, all of these things that we do in order to manage physically what's happening in our body as a result of anxiety, we teach those things to our children in the same way we teach them how to use a fork and a knife. And when we teach those things to our children in the context of relationship, and then they're in a math exam at school, and they've got to take some deep breaths to go into their bodies and get themselves settled down, who are they channeling? You. And it takes the tools of, say, deep breathing, and it magnifies it exponentially in terms of its potency and how effective it will be because you gifted that to them within your relationship, right? Connect to relax. And with that, we are done. I can take like one question, if anybody's got a question. Make it a good one, no pressure.
Okay, so you're the big person in that child's life. What about the other big people that are amongst and how they...
If you can see her face right now, then be like, what about the other? So here's the thing, two things. You are not here in the service of the world around. You are here in the service of that child. It does not matter what other people think of you. Their opinion of you is none of your business. It does matter how they treat that child.
That's what I'm talking about.
And so, luckily, about a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, but it's very recent, if you go onto my Dr. Vanessa Lapointe Facebook page, I posted a letter that Tina Payne Bryson and Dan Siegel, who are the authors of Whole Brain Child and No Drama Discipline, they wrote this letter as something that caregivers can give out to other adults so other adults can understand this way of responding to children. So just go on my Facebook page, give it a like, and print out that letter, and you can just hand it out to whoever you're working to bring alongside. The other thing that I'll say about that is similar to when you're working with a child, when you're working with other adults and you really want them to come on side, bees with honey. Connect before you deliver the directive. Okay. Thank you on this crazy day in the land of Lower Mainland traffic and everything else for being here this morning. Thank you on behalf of all of the children that you represent. And we're back in a month's time with?
We are. Normally it's up on the board, but 1 month, November 22nd, a Wednesday morning, same as this, 9:30 to 11:30. And Dr. Vanessa is back with Adapting and Thriving, the key role of relationship in promoting resilience for our children.